It is now my pleasure to introduce one of our region's most respected business leaders. Known for his success in the financial services industry, Mr. Meisenbach founded MCM in 1961. It's become one of the largest privately held benefits consulting and insurance brokerage firms in the Northwest. Last year, MCM gave $888,000 to organizations like United Way, Medical Teams International, Stolen Youth, Seattle University, and the University of Washington. Now, I know Mark touched on that last week, but that's worth rehearing again. John serves on boards including Costco, Expeditors International, and M Financial Group, and is known for his integrity and the long-term way he approaches his relationships. John and his wife, Ginny, have been described as catalysts, people who just do the right thing in the right way. Please welcome John Meisenbach to introduce today's speakers.
So, what do Colin Powell, Lance Armstrong, Kenny G, and Howard Schultz have in common? Is it their religion? No. Is it their race? No. Is it their occupation? No. What is it? I'll tell you what it is. They all know our speaker, Steve Fleischmann, and they're all friends of his. Let me tell you a little story about Steve. In 2003, Steve was at the University of Washington Hospital being readied for prostate surgery. As he was being pushed in the OR room, he tells his doctor, Paul Lang, when this is over and I'm back on my feet, I'm going to hold a fundraiser for you in the hospital. Well, Steve got back on his feet. He made good on his promise. Since that day, he has had 4 breakfasts benefiting prostate funding and research at the UW Medical Center and raised over $7 million. Steve is quite a guy. He's successful in business. He's a great philanthropist, a loving husband, and a father. Oh, yeah. He also is I love you guy. What does that mean? Steve says those words often to his friends, I love you. You know, most of us have difficulty saying I love you, let alone to another person or another man. But when Steve says those words, you know it's honest, sincere, straightforward, and from the heart. Let's welcome Steve Fleischmann.
Wow. Anyway, thank you very, very much for having me. And John, how do I express my appreciation for that introduction? I've known John well over 25 years. He is, excuse me, he's by far one of my closest friends. And I was going to say this anyway, because I have it actually written down, but now I love you very much. I was really going to say that. So anyway, John, thank you. I also want to thank Mark Davis and Randy Ottinger for asking my daughter Hannah and I to speak today, and this is a real privilege, and I'm thrilled to be here. And I also thought I just would say Mark's wife, Louisa, has named one of her cookies in their candy company Hannah's Delight. So obviously when I found that out, I was overjoyed. Can't wait to taste one of those Hannah's Delight. Anyway, I'd like to start out with some statistics about prostate cancer, and it's one of those subject matters, I guess, do you think that's this is a fun subject? Is it something that you guys are going to be having a lot of laughs about? And it's an overwhelming subject, is what I can say, and I'll just give you a few thoughts here. So if in a family for men, if a father or a brother has had prostate cancer, since it's the most hereditary cancer a man can get, you have 3 times of a greater chance of getting prostate cancer. 130,000 men a year in the USA alone get diagnosed with prostate cancer, and that number is continually growing, and over 33,000 men a year die of prostate cancer. If you were to add up all the cancers that men get, of all types of cancer, they don't amount to the amount of men that get diagnosed with prostate cancer, again, in just the USA alone. Only 10% of the men get diagnosed with prostate cancer under the age of 50. I happen to have been one of those in that unfortunate percentage. A lot of people think of prostate cancer, and it's always been this way, as, oh, it's an old man's disease. Eventually, we're all going to get it, and I'll die of something else before I die of prostate cancer, and that is just not true. The majority of the men that are getting diagnosed now are in their 50s and 60s. One reason is because of medical technology and also just because of them keeping up more on their checkups. And I've said this because I've spoke all over Seattle for years now on this subject matter, but both for men and women, but because it's prostate cancer, I direct this to the men. Please keep up on your physicals. It is imperative. And due to the potential side effects of prostate cancer, which is impotence and incontinence, it happens to be the cancer that most men don't ever want to say they ever had or have, of the embarrassment and just because of those two side effects, which it's not a guarantee it's going to happen, but it's what it's been symbolized as. So I'd like to just kind of run you through a little bit of a chronological event of my life and my story, and hopefully this will have meaning to you. So in 2003, I had gone in for my regular physical, and I'd always been in shape, worked out every day, totally physically healthy. I wouldn't say I ate so great, but I was definitely in shape. And I went in and had my physical done, and when I was getting my rectal exam, my doctor said to me, I feel something odd on your prostate. And I go, well, that's fine. And afterwards he said, I think you should go get a biopsy. And I go, okay. I always did what he said. So I went in and had a biopsy done, I think a couple weeks later, picked a urologist in Seattle. And I never got a call back. Like a week went by and I never got a call. I owned a company at the time, Fleischmann Office Interiors, right downtown Seattle. I'm sitting in my office and I just, I better call him and find out what's going on. I'm sure everything's just fine. I called up the doctor. He gets on the phone and without any hesitation, he says to me, I've got bad news for you. You have prostate cancer. Well, needless to say, I went into shock. I never thought I would be the guy that would hear that, the C word, as we call it, ever. And I was speechless. I didn't even know where to go with those thoughts in my mind. The first thing I did is I called up my wife, Patty, who's here today, and said, I need to talk to you. I've got prostate cancer. And she said, no matter, and this is how my wife has been through all the years of our marriage, she said, she'll drop what she's doing, and she said, I'll be right down to your office. You just wait for me. So I sat in my office in downtown Seattle, and I just was like, again, I didn't even know where to go with this. I couldn't put my arms around it. I couldn't rationalize it. She came in and she sat down and we both were in silence and I was numb. But the first thing I said to her is I said, I don't want anyone to know. I don't want anyone to know. You got to promise me that. Not only because of the side effects that never even really crossed my mind. I hardly even knew what my prostate was at the time. And I think most men don't even know what their prostate is. They just don't think about it. It was more of that I was a man, I wanted to show strength, I owned a company, I had a large staff, I wanted my community, I wanted everyone to think I'm on my game. And this showed to me weakness. It showed that I was vulnerable, and I didn't want to have those kind of feelings, and I didn't want anyone feeling sorry for me. Well, the majority of our conversation between my wife and I was her talking me into opening up immediately. And letting my friends and letting our community know that I came down with prostate cancer. So as I've done, I've trusted her, I trust her. And I went ahead and just, not that I picked up the phone and go, hey, John, how you doing? I got prostate cancer. Mom, I got bad news, good news. Anyway, so what I did do is I did not hold it in. And it's like a fraternity. It's a fraternity I hope no one here, if they haven't joined, has to ever join. I was given a name of somebody in Seattle, a very well-known man. I called him up. He was busy, and I told him, I said, I had prostate cancer. He put everything aside, and he said, how much? Let's talk. And he spent 45 minutes with me on the phone, which is where I came down saying, I'm going to give back for the rest of my life on this cause. The generosity of this guy taking that kind of time. So, anyone, you come down with cancer, you don't know, what do you do? Where do you go? What doctor? What kind of results? What kind of feedback? All of that. And my mind was spinning. And one of the issues with the internet, especially prostate cancer, is you go on, it is information overload. You don't even know how to sort it out. It takes you this direction, that direction. And I just needed to know, what do I do? So I found the very best doctor, happens to be in Seattle, Dr. Paul Lang. He had been chairman of the urology department for many, many years, and now he's head of what they call IPCR. I'm going to talk a little more about that later. It's prostate cancer research in Seattle, and he is in the top 2 in the world, and he's impossible to get into. Months and months to get in to see him. Well, I found a connection, and I got to him 2 days later. I met with him, scared. My wife and I met with him, I should say, and I had 2 options. I either had to have surgery, or, as you've known this, you can have these seed implants. And the surgery back then, which was called a radical prostatectomy, is where they actually have to open you up. Today, they do a thing called, it's Da Vinci. It's a robotic arm. It's almost like an arthroscopic surgery. They've continually progressed in prostate cancer. Just haven't found a cure, but we will. And I went ahead and had the surgery. So this is the story John had mentioned, which is a fact. I'm waiting to go. I'm in the pre-op, getting drugged up, et cetera, and now I'm getting wheeled into surgery with Patty on one side of me and Dr. Lang on the other. And I literally said, as I'm laying there, but this is just where my heart and my mind was going, I said, Dr. Lang, you saved my life, and get me through this. When I recover, I'm going to do a breakfast for you. Now, I will tell you, he honestly thought I meant I'm taking him to breakfast. And that's a fact. I then turned my head to this side, because you feel like you're a rubber band when you're high on all that beautiful morphine. And I said to Patty, as I'm basically almost going through those doors, I said, and I'm going to get Lance Armstrong. And back then, he was a huge hero. And she thought I was just high on drugs. Oh, sure, Steve. Anyway, needless to say, I recovered. And immediately I called up Dr. Lang. And I said to him, Dr. Lang, I am feeling great, and I'm ready now to do that breakfast, which he still is like, okay, well, what day do you want to do it? I mean, it's like, I had no idea. And I said, Dr. Lang, I've got something much bigger in mind than a breakfast. I'm talking about a fundraising event that had never happened before in the United States of this type. So I created a breakfast I named Survivors Celebration, and it was for only prostate cancer research. And actually, it's the IPCR, which is the Prostate Cancer Research Institute, and it's a collaboration between the University of Washington Medical Center and Fred Hutch. Never been done before in the United States. I'm like, where do I go with this thing? But I was committed, dedicated, and passionate. I came up with the idea, and I'd already chaired different fundraising events over the years. So I knew how to put events together, but this one, given the nature of what it was and what it meant to me, I said, okay, how am I going to make this be something successful and be something that could stand out? So I decided to have the table captains be only men who had had or have prostate cancer. And I went out to the community, and I literally put my work on hold. I owned a company. I did have a CEO, but I was very involved. But this was where my passion was, and this was my commitment. This was not about I needed to make more money. It was about I wanted this event to be a success. I handpicked and went and met with all these community leaders purposely who had both the respect and also the wherewithal with lots of different peers to get in bigger checks. But I would have to talk many of them into doing it, and I did, to get them to open up, to spread that, to pass the blanket about the importance of letting their community know and stand up because it's a disease so many men get. And I was fortunate because the very first year we did this was 2004. We had 1,000 people show up. I had no idea how many people would at the end of the day, and we raised $1 million. That was the first year out of the chute. I can't tell you, it was the happiest day of my life. And also, I'll just add the number of emails. I got hundreds of emails, people I'd never heard of before, that had just said, I want you to know I'm going to get a physical. Thank you for reminding me. Just that alone. Anyway, I would also add that one of the things that happened a lot when I decided I was going to put on this breakfast was a lot of my friends would say, please, can I be a table captain? And I would say, this is one event you never want to be a table captain at. So, let me get back to my next breakfast, which was in 2005, and now I want to bring up Lance Armstrong. That was the year he had won 7 Tour de France's. And no matter what anyone thinks in this room about Lance Armstrong, he still won 7 Tour de France's, and at that period, he was God. He was the #1 most sought-out speaker in the entire world. That's a fact. I had a connection to get to him. I wanted Lance Armstrong. And it's interesting in life when you have such a commitment to something that's for all the right reasons, and when you have this strong passion, you'll go to the farthest ends of the earth to make things happen when you know you're doing it for the right reasons. You don't hold back. And I didn't. So I went ahead and contacted him. Now, he never returned my phone calls, and he never returned my emails, and I have to say, which he actually said when he was speaking, because eventually I did get him, that I started contacting him at the wrong time. It was in July of 2005 while he was riding in the Tour de France. I would say that wasn't the best timing on my end. Anyway, I never got callbacks. I never got any response from him, and I just stayed on him. I was like a dog at a pant leg. And I just continued to email him. I didn't continue to keep phone calling him because I thought he'd get kind of sick of hearing my voice, but I did keep emailing him. And I kept structuring my emails to let him know how important and he needs to do this. And I gave him so many reasons why he needed to. My wife and I, in that October 2005, my breakfast was in December. It's getting close to my breakfast, don't have a keynote speaker, and I'm not letting up about Lance Armstrong. We were on a bike trip in southern France, and like a little kid, every night I was checking my email. Every single night. And the time difference, it's 1 o'clock in the morning, I would go and check the email. And almost towards the end of our trip, I get an email, and it's from Lance Armstrong. And he's a one-liner kind of guy, and it said, Fleischmann, we are good to go for your breakfast. Needless to say, I burst into tears. I mean, pent-up emotion I can't even express. And again, it wasn't I closed another big deal, I just made another big amount of money. It was, God could not have given me a greater gift. I ran to our hotel room. You know, in southern France, little hotel rooms, little hotel. I just didn't care. I barged in. Patty was sleeping. I woke her up. And again, she had been a support of mine through every step along the way, except I don't know that she thought I would get Lance Armstrong. I read her the email, and we both burst into tears. And we were both so appreciative. So sure enough, that December, Lance Armstrong came to Seattle. And I will tell you, it was at the Seattle Sheraton. We had fired code, 1,200 people. I could have filled up another room of 1,200 people. I mean, literally, I could have sold tickets. Besides, it was amazing. But most important, we raised $3 million. And I say this to get and thank you, but this is not about an applause to me, because it takes a lot of people to do all this. But what was really cool, while Lance was on his stage, he wrote a check back to our cause, for $1.7 million from the Lance Foundation. He was so impressed with the event. And when the event was over, he was off to South Africa. Instead of just leaving, which he did actually just leave, I get my assistant that came up to me and said, Lance would like to meet with you in his hotel room. That's the kind of guy he was. And I personally feel is. And I went up and we spent an hour together in his room. And we talked about cancer, blah, blah, blah. I never once talked about cycling, because my whole thing was about the cause. And he said to me, out of all the events I've ever been at and spoken at, this was the finest event I have ever been to. And what a community you have here in Seattle. So, going on, I want to now get to another chapter, and that was in 2007. Now, I will say first that getting cancer was the best thing that ever happened to me, for sure. It totally changed my life. I put my priorities in the right place, my family, and I valued my friends more than ever. And making money became way less important to me. Every day counted and meant way more to me. And I will let you know that I had made a life commitment that I was going to give back for the rest of my life to prostate cancer, to research, and to helping men. So I will say, one of the things that's happened is with the Seattle Cancer Care Alliance, they are now in the top 5 in the world for where people go when they get diagnosed with cancer. They go to their website. If you go to prostate cancer, I am their feature story. And I tell my story with my email address. And since 2004, I've been getting, now it's slowing down a little bit, thank God, but I've been getting an average of 1 to 2 calls or emails a week for years. I've helped hundreds and hundreds of men. Again, I don't say this because I need a pat in the back. I say it because it's my passion. And as my wife has seen me do many times, I make it a priority. When I get an email, and it's from men from all over the world, I get right back to them within minutes of receiving the email as long as I can. Because I know where their head's at, how much fear they have, and they don't know where to go. And I want to be at least the first person that they can talk to get them to at least feel some safety and some warmth and some caring, as that first man I told you about that put away his busy day to give me 45 minutes on the phone. So here's what happens in 2007. I end up getting my cancer back. And let me add one piece. You know, we all know of PSA. Well, the more important score is what they call a Gleason, and I'm not going to go into detail, but it really decides on how much cancer you have, and based on where in your prostate. It goes 6, 7, 8, 9. The difference between a 6 and a 7 is like 1 shot of caffeine versus 3. It's a huge jump. I had a 7, which meant it was very possible and likely that my cancer was going to spread. And also because I was so young at 47 years old, I had time against me, being young, a lot of years ahead, lots of time for the cancer to kind of continue to rejuvenate itself. So in 2007, that's what happened. It came back. You know, this time, even more so, how do I change my life? Oh my God, this is like how hard do you have to get hit on the head? So I had opted for, which is the next treatment after surgery, is radiation. I did 36 days in a row, the Seattle Cancer Care Alliance. Halfway through my radiation treatment, well, I should say, every day after radiation, I would go work out. I was going to defy any side effects. I was going to keep a strong mind, and I was going to physically be as in great shape as possible so that if there were going to be side effects, they weren't going to hit me. And about halfway through my radiation, I tore my rotator cuff. And I tore it so bad that I had to have surgery that night. I'm saying, what in the hell? I started looking, I was afraid to look at my stock portfolio. What could be going next that was going to go down? Sure enough, I have surgery that night, and with radiation, you can't miss a day. I had to get up the next morning, and I had to go back to radiation. And all I want to say about this is it was a reminder, because it was an awful period having to have the, blah, blah, blah. I feel like the old Jewish guys, you think your neck hurts. I had rotator cuff surgery, I got to have radiation tomorrow. I mean, come on. So what I did, though, is it made me realize, and my wife and I realized, we got to do something. We got to do something out of the box as a family. This is like, what could be next? So we made a decision to take an 8-month trip around the world. Hannah was 9 at the time. Our son Jack was 6. And we had built an itinerary around 22 countries. I went to my CEO of my company and said, I'm leaving for 8 months. This is your business to run. I'm not going to stay in regular touch. I want to have freedom. I want to be with my family. Now, if you remember, because we left in October 2007, which meant it got right into 2008, I shouldn't have brought up the stock market conversation earlier because everything dropped, including my business, which almost went out of business. And I didn't care. I wanted to be with my family, and those 8 months were the happiest 8 months of my life. During that time, I will say that we made a decision for me to sell my business and for us to move to Italy. So when we got back, I went ahead I sold my business. We moved my family to Italy. And while we were in Italy, now this is 2011, we moved, and I got my cancer back again. And so I ended up I opted for another surgery that was actually an experiment for the UW. They hadn't done before because normally they don't do post-surgeries after the first time. And it was an awful 2 weeks in the hospital, but it was just, again, a reminder of how precious life is every day, how important it is to get your priorities straight, to say I love you to the people that you can while you're alive, while you are able to. And I will just say that I feel very privileged that I'm healthy. I will say that a day doesn't go by I don't think about. I think almost anyone with cancer or has had cancer does think, am I going to get it back? And that just reminds me again how important that you make every day count and how much you got to appreciate being healthy. I want to thank you very, very much for allowing me to speak. And I do want to say we're doing our next prostate breakfast December 1st of 2015, and you are all invited. So thank you very, very much.
Good man. Look at that standing ovation. Great job, Steve. Hannah Fleischmann. Who would take meals to the homeless shelter, not once but 3 times? I'll tell you who. Hannah. What did you do as a child at Christmas, Hanukkah, or your birthday with your presents? I'll tell you what Hannah did. At 13 years old, she had all the donations from her bar mitzvah go to Tent City. The contribution was the largest single contribution Tent City has ever had. She's an incredible student, actress, speaker, national debater, and a very caring person. I have to tell you, I'm really biased when it comes to Hannah. She's not only a remarkable young lady, she's our goddaughter, Hannah Fleischmann.
Hi, my name is Hannah Fleischmann, and I'm 16 years old. First of all, I would just like to thank you all for allowing me the privilege of speaking on such an important subject for me. Today, I'm going to talk about how I felt when my dad was diagnosed with prostate cancer, especially this last time. I am up here to talk about what it's like from a kid's point of view, what it's like to have a parent or even a loved one go through cancer. When we're young, we think we are invincible. Nothing stands in our way, and nothing can bring us down. Bad things don't happen to good people. For as long as I can remember, I've always been the type of kid who wanted to hold everything together. I wanted to keep the peace and make sure everyone was all right. When I was in 9th grade, my dad was diagnosed with prostate cancer for the 3rd time. He said he would be home from the hospital after 5 days tops, and any of you who know my dad well know that he is a warrior. His determination and strength has inspired me in every aspect of my life, so I stayed positive. 5 days. If he can do it, so can I. But those 5 days turned into 2 weeks, and for the first time I realized that what was happening to my dad was so completely out of my control that it scared me. I had no idea what would happen next, and I'll be honest, I was afraid he might die. Everything just felt so unfair, and I was angry. Why us? What did we ever do? We've already been through this twice. Anger is so much easier to feel than pain. One of the hardest parts for me, and I think for most kids going through this, is the unknown. It's overwhelming and it's terrifying. There is no way for us to know what will happen next, and the feeling of utter helplessness you get, it's so hard. But today, I don't want to feel helpless. I want to be a voice for the kids of the parents in this room and for kids everywhere who are going through this. I want to be their voice when they can't speak. Now that I understand how hereditary the disease is, I want a cure not only for my dad, but for my brother. I never want him to go through what my dad went through, and I never want his kids to feel the pain and the fear that I and many other kids have felt. So listen to my voice and hear not only my words, but the words of kids everywhere that have had a parent go through cancer. Seeing all of you here today gives me hope that if we come together as a community, the battle against cancer really can be won. Thank you.
Knock the ball out of the court.
Wow. We've got about 5 minutes for some questions.
It's not usually a topic a lot of people have.
We have a question here. Jim?
Thank you very much for your presentation over here to your far left. I'm wondering if you could tell us perhaps what's evolving in the research front that you're helping to fund. What's happening there?
Wow, that's a big question with a lot to answer. I can just say that there are now drugs that have been approved. Dendreon, as we know, as a Seattle company, had a drug approved. Unfortunately, the company itself have not done quite as well as other companies that have prostate cancer drugs. I'll just say this, one of the things that's happening now, because there's so much research that's going on, is once a man gets diagnosed with prostate cancer and he's got a Gleason 6, if you remember, that's like, they know that it's contained inside the prostate. They're actually now waiting. They're not immediately jumping towards surgery. They're saying, let's give it more time, because with the progression of new drugs and new everything, they're going, maybe there's a better answer because the surgery is so evasive. It's a big question to answer, but a good question.
We have a question here. Mike Milken is the leading philanthropist in the world of prostate cancer. Have you engaged Mike Milken yet? Would be the first question. The second question is, what were your PSA readings in between? You were getting screened regularly, weren't you, in between? So, thanks.
Well, first of all, Mike Milken is who I called. I had a contact to get to him, and he's the reason that I got in to see Paul Lang, because they're friends. And actually, Mike Milken was the original person that gave $11 million to the University of Washington Medical Center for prostate cancer research years and years and years ago. And yes, I've talked with him, and he's asked me to get involved with his organization, and my loyalty is to the UW. The answer about the PSA is, when I went in for my first physical, I had under a 2 PSA, which is very little. Once you have a surgery and you're cancer-free, you're what they call negative 0.03. All it means is you're basically cancer non-detectable. So when you lose your PSA or your prostate, you should have no more PSA readings. When all of a sudden PSA readings start coming back, it means there's still cancer in you. And typically they start jumping from 0.05 to 1, 1.5, 2, and then it goes on accordingly. I always have had a fairly low PSA until my cancer came back. And by the way, there's a lot of discrepancy right now thinking that PSAs don't actually mean what they used to mean as far as a read. It's just important for everyone to keep up on their checkups, and most important, know if you have prostate cancer, as I said earlier, in your family. That's what's important to know.
Kim?
Thank you so much to both of you. Can you talk a little bit about, you said you want to tell your friends and your community, what about children? What do you say to children? And Hannah, did you hear what you needed to hear?
Well, I mean, of course, the hardest thing was for our kids were quite young. Hannah being at the age she was, it's like, what do you say? So you try to hide it the best you can, but then you go, wait a second. I mean, I had to sleep in I couldn't go up her stairs, so I was sleeping in her den in a hospital bed, so to speak. So I think she pretty much had an idea something was going on, but I don't know.
Well, the first time I was, I think, probably 6, and so I mean, my younger brother had no idea what was going on. He thought my dad probably just really liked TV or something. That's why he was sleeping there.
Took his TV room.
Yeah, that's true. But I was interviewed for a TV segment about prostate cancer, so I knew something was going on. And luckily, I'm extremely close with my family, and I have a great support group, and so they've always been there for me. But, I mean, there really isn't a lot you can say, and most people, just don't know what to do other than to just be there. And so I think for me, that was important, just having people there. But as I've now gone through it, I have things that I want to say, and that's why I'm speaking about it. So.
This question.
Thanks so much to you and your family for being here and sharing this today. Bless you. Just very quickly, the warning signs that tipped you off and recommendations for the men in the audience.
Well, I'll just give you again, that's a big question, and it's a great question. I'll just say the typical warning signs, first is, again, if you know that your father or brother had it, that's a pretty big warning sign right there to make sure you don't wait until you're 60 to get a PSA checkup or to really pay more attention. But, I mean, the truth is, when a man starts to feel he's urinating way too often, when he's starting to feel, I don't feel quite right, it could, be an enlarged prostate, it could actually, who knows. But here's the problem with prostate cancer, there aren't very many warning signs. That's the problem with it. And that's why you got to stay up on your checkups. Because the only way you'll ever know is getting a biopsy. It's the only way you'll ever know.
Thank you both. That was amazing. I can only imagine, as Hannah was sitting up here, how proud she was of her father, and when her father was up here, how proud he was of Hannah. Resilience, that's the word that kept coming to my mind as I heard them both talk, and that is just extraordinary human fiber. So thank you both for being here and for your courageousness and for putting your voice into the world and taking the risk to be so vulnerable with us. We're grateful.
Seattle Rotary Online is made possible
Special
in part
thanks to
by a
all of our
grant
program
from
participants,
First
Jeff
Choice
Herman
Health,
and John
working with the
Meisenbach. Thank you
Washington
for
Health
being here.
Information
Jimmy
Collaborative
Collins,
to use
Trish.
technology to bring better health care to patients throughout the Pacific Northwest. First Choice Health.